Hi, my name is David Lind. I'm an independent mental health services consultant and trainer, and I'm here working with the state of Missouri on another of their training videos for people who work on ACT-TAY teams, that is Assertive Community Treatment, Transition Age Youth Teams. These teams play an important part in supporting young adults as they make advances in their lives, despite the challenges of having a mental illness. In this video, we're going to talk some about the importance of setting up your ACT-TAY teams, some of the things that you might do in advance, and some of the early considerations for getting your ACT-TAY team off to a successful and early start. In this video today, I'm joined by 3 experienced members of an ACT-TAY team who took some time out of their busy schedule to be with us here today for this discussion. I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into some discussion about the teams.
Hi, my name is Scott Lorenz. I'm the team leader with the ACT-TAY program in Columbia, Missouri.
I'm Laura Frost. I'm the substance abuse specialist in Columbia.
I'm James Bryan. I'm the vocational specialist in Columbia.
Well, thank you, all of you, for joining us. We appreciate it. We know that you have a lot of important stuff to be doing, and we're glad that you take the time to be with us today as we make this video for new ACT-TAY teams. Throughout the course of the video, I would like to raise some ideas, perhaps some discussion subjects, and ask each of you to respond to them as we go through. We want to focus on giving some people who are setting up and developing their ACT-TAY teams some tasks they might want to think about as they do some planning for their teams. One of the important positions on an ACT-TAY team happens to be the team leader, and we're happy to have a team leader with us here today, Scott. And I guess I'd like to start with that concept. The ACT-TAY team leader plays a central role, has a lot of key functions, and really sometimes is responsible for setting the tone of the team and their services. I guess I'd like to ask you, if you don't mind answering in front of your own team leader, what do you think of some of the important traits that an agency might think about or look for in hiring somebody to be an ACT-TAY leader? James?
Well, I think the most important role that Scott or any team leader plays in my mind would be the crisis management side. There's a lot of daily duties and activities that he engages in, but when things start to go wrong, you really want a strong foundational team leader to help guide the team through those situations and just to always be that second set of competent eyes to help you make sure that you did your job correctly and covered the client's needs as best as you could.
So there's somebody who you can seek out, and it also sounds like seek out pretty quickly if you want maybe a consultation or to check in on something, and somebody who can bounce things off with in terms of that position?
Absolutely.
Great. Laura, any thoughts about important traits or characteristics for a team leader?
One of the things I've noticed is that, and I think in our own team, everyone's pretty very strong-willed person, and I think we work best with this age group. Those are the types of people that do. And Scott's been very helpful in that he's been more a guiding force instead of a traffic cop. And so I think that in working with us and being respectful and trusting who we are in our fields, and it's been supportive. I think it's helped to build a sense of collaboration too. And you have to be willing to take the brunt of responsibility, because we're going to blame everything that goes wrong on Scott at all times.
So it sounds like somebody who has some pretty big shoulders at times, as well as a good sense of humor. I'm taking it. You've been very patient about listening to your team, maybe talking about you with the Scott. What would you add, or what do you think are some of the traits for somebody looking for a good act, other than the ones we already know about you? What would be some other traits?
I would say definitely utilize the strengths of the persons in your program. You know, everybody's different. Everybody brings something else to the table. So, to fully utilize that, you've got to have some confidence in their competence and what they do, and make sure that you're not hindering them in any way, but, kind of supporting them and kind of their different endeavors, and making sure that maybe your management style fits each unique person, just so that as a team we can get as much accomplished as seamlessly as possible.
So it sort of sounds like there's almost a bit of a leadership balancing act there. In one way, you're leading the team and making sure that's focused, but you're also thinking almost with each individual as a team leader about how can I bring their best to the team and work to keep them in concert with the team. Am I getting that okay?
Yeah, most definitely. And then, kind of making sure, you said in concert, so making sure that all the pieces of the music are playing together and are coordinated.
And I can imagine that, if I think about concert and I think about the whole idea of music, it makes me a little think about tone too. And I'm wondering if each one of you would comment a little bit about what kind of role does the team leader set in terms of a tone for services? And is there anything that's important for a tone or anything to address if it starts to creep up as sort of a tone or a feeling in meetings that you want to make sure it gets addressed?
The team leader kind of operates, in my mind at least, to control that when things start, like you said, when the tone starts to move away from where you want it. I know at least Scott is very perceptive and has probably learned and practiced this over time as being the team leader, to notice when things are starting to move in a direction in the team meetings that maybe they don't need to go, or when we've moved too far towards one idea or one discussion, and to gently guide that back to where it needs to go. And that's not always easy because, as Laura said, this is a very strong-willed line of work, and the people in it tend to be very direct and blunt and want to make sure that they're conveying what they want heard. So you're constantly fighting against that as the team leader and wanting to make sure that you do it subtly but also directly and effectively.
So that's, again, some of that balancing act with folks. Laura, any thoughts about setting team tones and team leader responsibility around that?
That's an interesting question. I was trying to think. I think one of the things is there are times when Scott will say, hey, instead of you going out and seeing that person, why don't we let someone else do it? I'm thinking of a situation where we had a person who was becoming psychotic, and he had this client had a much better rapport with the peer support specialist than with anyone else. And so we doubled up in going out and assessing that person because they were far more comfortable with the peer support specialist than they were the qualified mental health professional. And so the rapport between them, that was very helpful in making an accurate assessment about the safety of this individual. And so there are times when I think Scott will say, hey, why don't we utilize you to go out and talk to this person and help to strategize about what's in the best interest of the client.
So almost using some situational strengths of the staff in terms of addressing the tone. So Scott, thank you for being very patient as we perhaps talk about you a little bit again. I'm wondering from your perspective what you think about or what advice you might give to other folks about thinking about an ACT leader and his or her responsibility for setting a tone within a team and the way the team works.
I think just like we were talking about earlier with music, the team leader is kind of that conductor that will set the pace a little bit for maybe those team meetings. We'll maybe provide a little extra push to increase productivity as far as if we're in a team meeting, we need to stay on point. But I think another big piece is just kind of gauging which providers maybe need to address certain issues and directing traffic in that area. Like Laura was saying, there's things that occur where the team is just naturally going to know this person's maybe a good fit, has the skill sets necessary to address a certain situation. So as a team leader, your team starts to almost direct itself in some ways, and that we're all kind of aware of each other's capabilities, and sometimes those decisions are just so obvious that we don't even necessarily have to talk about it. It's kind of on the forefront of all our minds. Our peer specialist would be the perfect person to go and speak with this person.
It kind of sounds like you've paid careful attention to one of the early tenets of assertive community treatment or ACT teams, which is sometimes challenging for a lot of teams today. And that tenet was that the person should be attached to the team and the team should be attached to the person. And what I'm hearing you all saying is that you're careful and thoughtful about that, not only on strengths and challenges, but also situations and relationships, so that people are interchangeable. And I'm kind of guessing with that, it means that one person's progress doesn't belong to a team member, but the team helps everybody with their progress, and one person's challenges also are helped by the whole team. Is that fair for my assumption around that?
Absolutely.
Nice work. One of the other things that I know that comes up a lot with teams is this idea of daily team meetings. For people who might have been in different kinds of team meetings, they've maybe never been in a team meeting that looks like an assertive community treatment or assertive community treatment transition age youth team meeting. These meetings tend to have a much different culture and focus to them and much different perspective. I'm curious, what are some of the things that you would advise an early team in terms of thinking about maybe setting up or preparing for their daily team meetings? What may be some things you want to pass along to them?
I would say one thing is knowing what information you're going to collect for fidelity to the model, and just almost set up a little bit of a pattern as far as when we maybe move on to a new person. This is the critical information that we need to present. And then know that you've got about a minute per person to divulge any other information that might be beneficial to the rest of the team during your session with them.
I want to move on to other folks, but it's sort of one of those places where I can't help myself. You mentioned you have about a minute to discuss it. When you start telling people that, I could imagine some people like, well, it takes 5 minutes to say my name. How do you condition people to what you want to get out in a minute? And is there a trick to that?
Well, I would say kind of setting the standard as far as what are the vital bits of information that were obtained and what's going to be most useful for the team. When you sit down and you think about, wow, I've got a minute to discuss, maybe some critical psychiatric information that was gathered during an hour meeting with somebody, and you're like, that sets the tone for, maybe shortcomings in the information that you're sharing. But in reality, we're meeting with these people, 3 to 5 times a week. So as a team, our meetings looks very disorganized. I know one of the analogies Laura likes to use is it's a beehive, right? It's just chaos. But we're all meeting every day, and so this information is just building upon yesterday's meeting, last month's meeting, last year's work. So while it seems like a pretty short period of time to share such important information, it's really a pretty good amount of time for most situations. We will table things just so that we can maintain our time frame, and if maybe James or Laura met with somebody that has a little bit more acute symptoms going on or something that needs to be discussed in detail, we'll table them and kind of share that information at the end of the team meeting so that a little more time can be spent on that information.
Great, that's very helpful. Laura or James, thoughts about what you might pass on to newly developing teams or teams setting up about in terms of planning for team meetings and strategies to make them effective?
I think the most important part of the team meeting that we haven't mentioned yet is just the idea of using it as the time to plan for how you're going to bridge one provider's session with a client into another provider's session with a client. So, for example, if I'm working with someone on a difficult job application and they've told me they're going to work on it in the evening while I'm not there, just even something as small as asking Laura, who may be meeting with them today, can you ask them about where their progress is? So that way I'm not losing any time with them, at least on my end, and can always be ready to meet them wherever they're at. Those little bridging statements or follow-ups for your fellow providers are really the foundation of ACT, I think.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, very much.
Laura?
I think that when we first started, we just had a handful of clients. And so it was a lot of information, and we were getting to know each other, and we were getting to know the clients. So it's real interesting in watching how the team starts, because it did afford us some time to discuss things at length and to strategize and plan and learn about each other's strengths. And then as time went on, and don't let Scott fool you, because he set a timer out and we had 1 minute to say what we needed to say, and that was it. Unless we did the, hey, I need to table this client. So there was that, because, and it helped because we do have a specific amount of time, and then we've got to get off and going. We've got billable hours to consider and clients that we have appointments. So there's that balance, I think, in the team, which is, let's talk about what's needed from a clinical perspective, but also balance that out with, at some point, you just have to cut it off and move on to the next person. And I think that was what we had to learn. But as you develop your team and you grow more clients, you adapt to that.
So I'm hearing a couple parts of that. One is really some conditioning almost. I hear Pavlov's bell in here somewhere, and that it's time for the team to move on. But it sounds like it was somehow done in a way that worked without offending people. And the other piece you heard, and I was just wondering if I could ask you a little bit more. You mentioned when you started out, you didn't have as many folks. How early should a team start meeting? Should they wait till they have 20 clients? When should they start?
I think for the fidelity of the model, you start immediately, because that is part of the ACT process. And so, we had 5 clients and it didn't take very long, and then we just talked some and then moved on. And then we found, we've got 20 clients now, but it's taking us an hour and a half. That's not going to work, because we're going to get more clients. So we adjusted and adapted, but in the process of that, again, we learned how to be a team because we had time to communicate. Whereas now, we go through the clients very quickly, but we know each other well enough to know that if I say, okay, we're working on this in a therapeutic setting, or this is what we're working on for substance abuse, and I know that James is meeting with them tomorrow, it's a very quick little, hey, check in on this, great, I'll do it, and that's it, that's all that's needed. So the strategizing time, I think, decreased significantly because we learned each other.
I will say though, the question you asked, I think, was how early should these be started? Immediately, absolutely immediately. The team meeting is such a central part of the ACT identity and the ACT model, and learning, even if, like Laura said, you aren't necessarily taking your full hour team meeting to strategize on your 5 clients in the first month.
Right.
That getting adjusted to that time being almost sacred is really, really important, because in this line of work, it's so easy to be like, there'll be another one tomorrow. That can't happen with the ACT team meeting. It is such a central part of the way the ACT model works that you want to get in and ready and involved with it right away.
So it sounds like there's no time like the beginning.
Absolutely.
and just to go ahead and jump right in with that. You raised a really wonderful point that'd be a good bridge to the next thing that I was thinking about talking about, if we might be able to do that. And you mentioned the idea of the ACT meeting or the ACT team meeting being so central to success. I think if you look at a lot of descriptions going back to assertive community treatment over the year, people describe it everywhere from the nerve center to the air traffic control. And that meeting, I think a lot of people assume sometimes, well, they do the meeting because it's what a team does. I wonder if you could peel that back a little bit with me, and I'd like to hear from y'all about what do you get, or what's important that the services to the clients that you serve get out of those meetings? What are some of the key things that you get out of an ACT meeting?
I know just on my end as the vocational specialist, it is easy sometimes to, I know with the ACT model that I'm going to be working with a client on a variety of things, but I also know that my specialization is work and school-based. And so it is easy for me to kind of think about a person in those terms. But when I've got all of my providers around me at that team meeting, I can talk to Laura and find out that there has been a change in a person's issues or relationship with substance abuse that may be affecting their ability to work or their comfort with working. I wouldn't necessarily have been able to pull myself out of that rut as easily if I didn't have that kind of support, and then have the whole team to strategize with around that. So I think just the ACT team meeting, in terms of the clients and what they benefit, that meeting is what helps us provide that whole team approach that so many clients benefit from.
So that's really getting to that idea of really an integrated kind of services using multidimensional perspectives.
Yes.
In terms of seeing somebody. Great. Laura, thoughts from you about what comes out of that meeting?
Well, when I first started out in mental health, I was a caseworker. So I was the individual that met with someone, once a week for 2 hours, and we had all these things we needed to accomplish. So change happened very slowly. Whereas in this team, if I'm talking to someone and I'm noticing they're not eating, they're not sleeping, they're isolating more, I'm getting that they're having more depressive symptoms. At that meeting, in the next few hours, I sit across from the nurse and the psychiatrist and say, I'm seeing more depressive symptoms, this is what's going on. By that afternoon, there may be a change in medication if that's what the psychiatrist warrants. So it's immediate. It's not, okay, you're having depression, let's make an appointment, and it's a month out, and then we have to get you through the next month until the appointment. It's immediate, and I think it creates a sense of change happens so much faster for the client because of that. But you also asked the question, I heard that, what does it do for you and what does it do for the client? And it prompted me to think that this is very lonely work. We are quite isolated with our client at times. And so when I'm having my own personal reaction to a client, or I'm getting frustrated because I'm not seeing change happen, it's nice to be able to vent and to talk and to bounce off of the other providers, because so often, and I think James said this too, it's nice because I'm not seeing any change and I'm getting frustrated, for him to say, oh yeah, but look, they've been able to keep a job for a month, this is amazing, and for me to bring that perspective back in. And we do deal with some very difficult situations, and so there are times where I've been able to go to other providers and say, I've had a horrible day, and be able to talk about it, because I'm not able to go home and talk about it. I'm not able to, just talk about it with anybody, but I can talk about it with someone who understands what is going on and what has happened. And so there's that other part of it, that it is a supportive environment. And I find that one of the most beneficial things to me professionally and personally is that team meeting affords that.
So it sounds like in some ways the team not only wraps around the clients you serve, but it also wraps around each other.
I think so.
So there's sort of a parallel function there. I'm sorry to keep making you wait every time for last. But since you're the team leader, let's do that for a minute. But what are your thoughts about this whole question about what's important that comes out of that team meeting, Scott?
I would definitely say the continuity of care. They were talking about discussing maybe what's going on with the client, and I think one important thing that comes out from that is that we're not asking the client the same question every day. Since we meet them, 3 to 5 times a week, they don't want to sit there and tell James what they told me yesterday and what they told Laura the day before. They kind of expect, and rightfully so, that communication piece, which is what that team provides. Provides us the opportunity to all get on the same page as providers, and make sure that we're providing relevant care, we're not duplicating services, and that we're making things as efficient as possible.
So part of what I'm hearing collectively from you all too is it's sort of like fitting pieces of a puzzle together in order. You're not trying to put in a duplicate piece 3 times. You're trying to put in the next piece. And I also hear you kind of describing that the pieces are intended to complement and support each other. They're not sort of totally separate pieces, but they seem to, if they could, be aware of how each of them fits together. It's strategic. Wonderful. I have one more question about the teams and the tone. And one of the things that we're learning a lot with transition age youth, and we know this about children, is unlike adults, or at least to a greater extent, we know with transition age youth, we can really support them in this concept called resiliency focus, helping people either connect with social supports or learn problem solving, have good relationships, have positive things in their lives. I'm curious, what kind of challenge does that put on a team, or how do you as a team kind of think about, these aren't finished products that we're working with, these aren't people we're just working to manage, but these are people that we want to help flourish and grow as they make progress. And how does that happen within a sort of a team picture?
That's an interesting question. I think in adolescence is a time where we try on different identities, we try on different behaviors, like a small child would, try on dress-up clothes. And so just because you see someone walk in the door and they be, I don't know, all cowboyed up, and then the next day they look like a punk rocker, and they trade these identities so quickly that what you are seeing is an unfinished product. And I find that in the process of change, this age group tends to do 2 step forwards, 3 steps back, 1 step forward, 6 steps back, and then all of a sudden, a month later, they'll just jump ahead 50 steps. And it's interesting to watch the process, because it's not like playing Monopoly. It's not like, one piece at a time going around the board. They just go all over the place. And so meeting them where they're at is a big part of where we strategize in a team, because today they may be focused on the breakup with their significant other, and then a week later that they're not even thinking about that person ever existed, and they're off to something else. And so while we're still maintaining the focus on teaching them problem-solving skills, we use it within where they are at that time. And the team meeting is a good time to strategize that.
I think sometimes it's easier for us on the outside, and I'm not just saying providers, but anybody, but I'm coming from the provider's perspective because that's who we are here. But to see the transitional age youth in particular as a whole person, with a forward and a backward, rather than just themselves in that moment, because that tends to be how they see themselves. And so that's what gives you the chance to, support them through missteps or mistakes. This is the time in your life, where you're supposed to be learning and adapting to the mistakes you make and responding to them and changing your approach. So you had a bad day at school. You still went. You went to school, you attempted, you did the best you could, and you got through that situation. I know I had a situation recently where a client was testing out testing out volunteer interests, and that was something that was very important to him. And he got down on himself because he went for 2 hours and didn't stay because he didn't like it. And I said, you went for 2 hours and you figured out you didn't like it and you left. That's incredibly appropriate, and there's nothing wrong with that. You did great. You are expanding your horizons, you're branching out, and you're testing out new things. And it's easier for us to see that with this population than maybe they can even see it in themselves.
So I'm hearing maybe using some cognitive reframing, using some strengths perspective, helping people see different ways to see them in a situation, and maybe their own choices and efficacy versus being trapped by a situation, at least in that way.
The choices and efficacy are so important with this age group.
Well, Scott, I want to turn to you and ask your thoughts about this, and I absolutely promise before we go on to the next round of questions that I'll actually let you reply first next time. I appreciate your patience with this, but I'm curious your thoughts about working with a team and this population and really trying to keep that sort of resiliency focus with the clients you're serving.
I think when we're talking about kind of fostering resiliency as a team, our role a lot of times is to allow them that space to feel comfortable as they're trying on some different hats. You know, James was talking about a situation where there was a client who was getting down on themselves because maybe an avenue they went down just turned out to be something they were not interested in. And so I think as a team, a lot of our role is to provide that place where clients can feel comfortable to come in, maybe express themselves, explore different interests and options, and do so in a manner where we're still there and able to provide supports.
Sounds like an interesting challenge at times, but it sounds like it takes good leadership.